afternoon, everybody. A massive welcome to everybody to this issue, I suppose, of thinking about. My name is Ben Jones. I'm the Director of Science at Alleyn School, and it's a great pleasure to welcome people. I was going to say children, but people, human beings from I think 7 different schools, SSLP related schools. It's absolutely brilliant to welcome you all, and it's a particular pleasure to welcome Khalil Thirlaway, who we'll be hearing from in just a minute. I'm slightly biased in this because I'm a teacher at Alleyn School. Khalil was an old boy of our school a number of years ago. He can tell you how long ago that was. I suspect not long ago. He studied after here. He went to Bristol University to study biology. He did a PhD in immunology at Nottingham, where he was the president of the Wing Chun Kung Fu Club. So watch out. Much he's done since then, including being a curator at the Science Museum in London. He is a tremendous science communicator, is co-host of the Wild Crimes podcast, which you'll find on Spotify, and about which we'll be hearing from him in just a minute. But his day job is that he's a science communicator at the Natural History Museum. We've just spent a few minutes together just a minute ago, and it's quite clear this guy is a communicator. So Khalil, lovely to welcome you, and I'll hand over to you now. Thank you.
I'm going to start off by saying I'm intending to, not to go on too long with what I am talking about, because I'm really looking forward to kind of the conversations that we can have near the end of the session. So, without further ado, yes, I am a science communicator at the Natural History Museum, and that means that my job is to build people's relationships with science and to help people understand that, science and nature aren't big, scary topics, things and that they're relevant to everyone's lives. For some of the highlights, last week, I got dressed up and I went to an awards show for the radio and podcast industry. And you might be thinking, why are you telling us this? This is a weirdly specific flex. That, I say, yeah, well, kind of, but it is relevant because the reason I was there was for this, Wild Crimes. So Wild Crimes is a podcast that we made at the Natural History Museum with a company called Whistledown Productions last year. It's all about the crimes that we commit against nature. By that, I don't mean the creation of the pug, although I do hold that to be a crime against nature. But it's things like poaching, endangered species smuggling, and the illegal fossil trade. Now, these as crimes compared to some of the more kind of famous or well-known crimes, they might seem a bit niche and trivial, but they have far-reaching consequences, not just for the species and ecosystems that directly affected by the crimes, but also the wider environment. And it's important not to ignore there's loads of people exploited along the way. So I'm going to chat through, got some pug supporters in the chat. We'll have to agree to disagree on that. So I'm gonna chat through a couple of examples of some of the crimes that we cover in the podcast. But for the more complete stories, you can give it. And then we're going to talk about some of the things that connect these crimes and maybe even what we can do about it. Then at the end, I'm mostly looking forward to having a good chat with all of you. I've tried to avoid showing any particularly gruesome images, but some of the slides coming up might be a little distressing because they are of wildlife crimes. Like I said, I'm not going to be showing anything crazy, gruesome, or... So, wildlife crime. One of the most common examples, or the most famous examples, is the ivory. And it's kind of a good example for us to hook on so that we can look at some of the stages that we can break wildlife crime down into. Because if you think about an elephant tusk, each two of those tusks represents a dead elephant. But why? Why kill all these elephants? Why get their tusks? What's the point? Why are they valuable? And the answer is not simple. pretty complicated. You have to think about it from all sorts of angles. So the three main ways we can break it down are the stages of where the product travels. So we can break that down into source, transit, and destination. So the source would be where the elephants live, and it would be the communities around there and the factors that affect the drive to kill elephants and the drive to take their tusks. The transit would be the traffic. It would be how they get, collected from the people who are actually doing the poaching, how they get, trafficked and transported and sold by various people in various stages, making money along the way. And then the destination part is, where are they ending up? Why? Who's buying them? What are they using them for? What's creating that demand? And all of those factors around that. So the first example, and I apologize for my slightly croaky voice. I've been doing a lot of shows for the museum recently, so it's had a bit of a workout. The first example is going to be this lovely, beautiful, cute little guy. Does anyone know? Can you put in the chat if you know what this organism is? No, it's not a sand slash, although I know naming first generation Pokemon really dates. This is a pangolin, also known as a spiny anteater. And as well as being absolutely adorable, it's really, really under threat. In fact, there are several species of pangolin and they are all under threat. They are the only mammal that has scales, but these scales are made of the same stuff that your hair and nails are made of, keratin. And they're great armor for when they're being attacked by predators, but that's also what's getting them killed, because pangolin scales are used in traditional East Asian medicine for a range of things, and they are incredibly valuable. And this is it's a real shame, because pangolins, their armor is great against stuff that's trying to attack you with claws and teeth. But if your defense against being attacked is to just curl up in a little ball, then if you're a predator that is trying to pick them up with a hand, like a human, you can just literally just pick it up. So the pangolin's greatest defense has actually become both the reason that it's being hunted and also the reason that it's so easy to hunt. And this has led to the pangolin being the world's most trafficked mammal, after people, world's most trafficked non-human. So let's break it down into those steps we were looking at. We've got the source, the transit, and the destination. And it's actually sometimes more informative to work backwards. Let's start from there. Why do people want pangolin scales? And like I said, most of the demand is in the kind of traditional East Asian medicine kind of area. And there are steps being made by international governments. The Chinese government recently removed pangolin scales from the list of kind of approved traditional medicines, which is a really kind of big step for a government to make. But that doesn't necessarily change people's attitudes, and it doesn't change people's interaction with an illegal trade. And another reason that pangolins get killed is for meat, for food, because they're really easy to hunt. But that's not generally, in most parts of the pangolin's range, that's not a big driver of killing them. The scales are really ramping things up, because as we explore in the podcast, some parts of the pangolin's range, because they live, different species of them live in different parts of Africa, and they interact with different human communities. Some communities that live alongside pangolins, if they've had a bad hunt and they haven't been able to catch anything bigger, on the way home they might pick up a pangolin, but they used to just throw away the scales, because the scales, they don't taste good. You eat the meat. But then eventually you had basically people in the transit part of this chain who would basically be middlemen in this trade of pangolin scales, and they would go to these rural communities and say, okay, I will pay you, X amount of dollars for these, what are essentially waste products, these scales. And often these people are bringing in a lot of money. This stuff that might not be a lot of money in richer countries, but to rural communities in these places, it carries a lot of weight. And so that drives the source part of that chain. It drives the killing of the pangolins, because then pangolins don't they become not just a quick and easy snack you can pick up on the way back from a failed hunt. It becomes a commodity, and it becomes an incredibly valuable commodity. The scales are even more valuable than the meat, and you can do a lot of good in your community with that money, despite that also driving something to extinction. So it's really important when we think about wildlife crime, because stuff's only a crime because it's illegal. It's really important to avoid demonizing or vilifying people who are involved in various stages of this system without really understanding the factors around that. Because you might say, oh, that person killed a pangolin, they're a bad person. Are they? Or have they been trying to provide for their family, and this exploitative system and supply chain has given them an incentive? It said, if you do something that is a bad thing, I will reward you richly, and you can do a lot of good things with that money. So that was something that was really interesting to explore during the podcast, the moral complexities and the social complexities around these issues. And there's also a lot of people who are working within these countries and these areas at all sorts of levels to help kind of mitigate that harm. So there are people who infiltrate pangolin smuggling rings and rescue pangolins, with like armed police and all these crazy raids. And there's pangolin orphanages that will raise pangolins that have been rescued from the traffic and try and release them into the wild. So, it's not all doom and gloom. It's a very complicated picture. And it's really important to acknowledge all of those aspects. I know I'm not going super deep into any of these examples. If you want to know more, like I said, we've got a whole episode about pangolins. And our next stop on this journey is reptiles. Now, this guy might not look super happy. Jokes aside, reptiles they're a really interesting case, because they're unusual animals to have as pets, and they're pretty fashionable in the last few years because they're unusual, they're very striking visually. Some of them have really cool behaviors, like chameleons change color and stuff. And so you get whole waves of people getting exotic pets for social media clout, or because they saw it on social media and being influenced by that. And people quite quickly realize that reptiles have some really particular requirements for looking after them, and people often dive into that kind of thing without properly thinking about it. And so that's kind of what's driving the supply, driving the trade, is the demand for exotic pets. And sometimes it's done, at like an industrial scale, and you have these trade fairs where they've got like buckets and buckets and buckets of, look at this, like, how is that enough space to keep a small reptile in? But also, sometimes, and this is less common than you'd like, but sometimes people do realize. So this is a YouTuber who she has a few exotic pets, and she got a chameleon who she loved very much, and then she realized quite quickly that she was not equipped to take care of this creature. She couldn't, she had underestimated its intelligence and emotional needs. She had underestimated how complicated its nutritional and medical needs are. And so actually, not long afterwards, as you can see here, she went from, yeah, I know everything about keeping a chameleon, I can tell you stuff, to crying on camera and saying, I'm never going to buy another chameleon. Which, I think it's an important lesson for her to have learned. And it's great that she's using her platform to then, oh, am I cutting out? Oh, I'm sorry. Let me try adjusting the cables. Is that any better? I'll keep going. Yeah, so it's great that this person has learned that she may have miscalculated, and she's using her platform, because how we talk about these issues and how we keep each other accountable and how we share this kind of information is super important, because otherwise it's just a bunch of conservationists screaming into the void and no one's listening. So the more that we can kind of spread these messages and have these honest conversations without kind of immediately alienating each other is really important. And the third example I'm going to look at is one that's much closer to home, actually. So, with the chameleons and pangolins. So chameleons, generally, a lot of them live in Madagascar, which is a large island on the east of Africa. And pangolins live in Asia. And so we often think of wildlife crime as kind of, it's something that happens far away. It's something that happens in other countries. It's nothing to do with us unless I, buy an exotic pet or something like that. But actually, wildlife crime happens in the UK pretty routinely as well. And one example of this is birds of prey. So you don't actually see that many birds of prey in the UK, which is interesting because we have a few species that are endemic to the UK. But, you might see a couple if you're, driving along the motorway, you look out the window, but they're much less common than they should be, and they're much less common than they used to be. And that is because of shooting. And it's not because they're shooting the birds of prey, although in some cases they are. But what it really is that they're shooting these guys, grouse. So grouse are ground nesting birds, and they need a quite specific type of kind of managed ecosystem to thrive and to have lots of numbers. So because a lot of the landowners who own land, especially in the north of England and Scotland, but also throughout the UK, they use their land to generate a lot of money through tourism, and a lot of that tourism is shooting. And to make money through shooting, you need a really specific type of kind of grouse moor, and it needs to be very, very heavily controlled, because a lot of these people who are coming to shoot grouse, they want to come home from their holiday and be like, I shot 100 grouse. They want to be kind of shooting up into the air like Yosemite Sam, seeing it rain dead birds. And so for that, you need a huge number of grouse to be present. And so you need to make the conditions perfect. So you need to get rid of any competitors. You need to clear any vegetation that isn't, to their liking. And especially, you need to get rid of predators. And this results in a lot of what we call raptor persecution. So that's killing or destroying the nests of birds of prey. And this is often done through poison, sometimes through shooting or trapping, like I said, often destroying their nests. And this story, I think, raises a really important point about a lot of wildlife crime, and that is the human exploitation angle of this. Because when people get caught for killing birds of prey in the UK, which is relatively rare because wildlife crime doesn't really get enforced that well, when people get caught and punished, it's almost always the groundskeeper. It's the person who is going out there maintaining the grouse moor, you know, often living in a home that is supplied by the landowner and who is their employer. And so if they don't do what the landowner says, they don't just lose their job, they also lose their home, their vehicle, all sorts of stuff. And so they're under a lot of pressure to deliver the results that the landowner wants. But if the groundskeeper gets caught killing raptors, there is actually currently in England no responsibility goes to the landowner. Scotland recently made some legal changes that are bringing in responsibility for the landowners as well. But it's a system where the landowner makes a huge amount of money from people coming to shoot birds on his land. To make the most money out of that, he forces the groundskeeper to break the law, to kill birds of prey. And then the groundskeeper gets caught, goes to jail. And the landowner just gets another groundskeeper. So it's really important to acknowledge that the human exploitation and the animal and environmental damage go hand in hand. So what have we got from all three of these stories? What do they share in common? So first of all, I'd say that none of these stories are just about the species. All of them have knock-on effects on the environment and the ecosystem, as well as people locally and along the supply chain. And secondly, they all involve money. Why do people do any of these things? Why do they, collect pandas? Why do they exotic reptiles for the pet? Why do they kill birds of prey on grouse? All money. And so, if they weren't profitable, people wouldn't do them. So they're a product of the supply and demand mechanisms. They're a product of capitalism. Because one thing that I haven't really touched on yet, that and probably the best example of this, as something gets rarer, it's more valuable. So the more, the more of a certain species of alien, let's say, taken from their small habitat for the pet trade, the rarer they become in the wild. And that means that each one that's left is much more valuable. So there's even more of an incentive to go out and grab it. So these kind of mechanisms are what's driving these crimes. And we've really got to take a look at how we can break that cycle. And as I said earlier, another thing that combines, that connects exploitation, not just people exploiting wildlife, but people exploiting people. Now, I know it's been a little bit grim so far. I've been telling you about all sorts of nasty stuff, but what can we do? And that's not a rhetorical question. I'm not just throwing my hands up in despair. There are things we can do. First of all, we really, really need effective international cooperation. Lots of these crimes are really international in their nature. A lot of the time, the source country and the destination and the transit chain will include loads of other countries. And these have different laws and different priorities and different resources that they can put into enforcement. And so it's really important that we can get as much international collaboration as we can to have a uniform enforcement of wildlife laws. So, for example, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime has a whole department, a whole team that deal with stuff like wildlife crime, which is great. It's not quite as resourced as it could be, but it's a really great way to coordinate international efforts to then kind of to let countries put in their own resources to really make this go. But also, like I said, money. If money is part of the problem, then maybe money can be part of the solution. And I don't just mean, throw money at initiatives that are fighting wildlife crime, although that is important. We do need to fund things like, sorry, roles and things like that. But also, we look at the source side of that supply chain, the drivers that are making people feel that they need to resort to wildlife families. There are all sorts of projects that essentially they use those mechanisms of supply and demand and capitalism to give people options to support themselves that don't involve harming the environment. So, for example, there's an organization that one of the main reasons that gorillas get hunted and killed is their conflict with farmers. And so there's a project that not only runs kind of ecotourism business that employs local people so that people can come and kind of see the gorillas in the wild, but also employs other local people to grow and sell really lovely high quality coffee from those areas, so that the area that has already been deforested can be used as a kind of sustainable community owned business, as well as supporting these ecotourism efforts. So that's an example of how money can be not just part of the problem, but also part of the solution. And it also involves how we use our money. Like I said, we are all at the demand end of some of these. So if we're more cautious and conscious with how we use our money, then we can at least kind of lessen the pressure. We're not going to solve the problem through our individual wallets, but it can be part. Like, for example, here, Megan Margot said, "I'll never buy another chameleon again." Not only has that meant that she's not putting money into this, so hopefully, maybe other people won't put their money into this legal. Like I said, money is one of the drivers, then that's one of the places that you. And one of the things I really want to kind of end on, I think one of the fundamental the problem is both individual and systemic. I cut out again. Am I back? The problem, am I here? Am I on? The problem is both individual and systemic. And so the solutions have to be individual and systemic. We can't just do this by, we're all going to change our individual behavior and I'm not going to buy any chameleons, because you're ignoring these entire large systems that contribute to these problems. But at the same time, our individual changes can help lead to those systemic changes. So how we spend our money, how we vote. And I know a lot of the audience here are going to be, nearly able to vote soon, maybe already able to vote. Where and how we travel. So, if we go on holiday, making sure that we're not, supporting businesses or places that will kind of enable this kind of exploitation of the environment. Also, the conversations that you have with your friends and family and online, because like I said, if we're just fighting this fight on our own, then that's not really going to get us anywhere. We need to spread this kind of conversation and make it more normal for people to talk about. And then on the systemic side, we've got international cooperation and kind of fixing the economic and financial dynamics, imbalances that incentivize wildlife crime, and also to punish it seriously, because punishments for wildlife crime are disgracefully light. It's not taken anywhere near as seriously as it should be. So with that, I'd really like to open up to a conversation with all of you. And I'm really sorry if I cut out at various points and didn't realize. I'm happy to fill in anything if you want to ask any follow-ups.
Hi, Khalil. Thank you so much for your talk. It was really interesting to just understand why world crime is such a big problem, and just to know that it isn't a situation where you're like, oh, you need to stop doing this, and people stop, because it's just so much deeper than that. And we could hear you for most of it. It was just, yeah, we got the message. I just wanted to ask, if this is such a big problem, why isn't there more action being done to prevent it? Why aren't we taking a stand now?
That's a good question. I think part of it is that it's the consequences of it are not really being felt very hard by people like us in privileged situations. Because biodiversity loss is it's more of a kind of Jenga problem than kind of, yeah, it's more of a kind of Jenga problem than a kind of gradual problem. As in, biodiversity is the richness and resilience of an ecosystem. And, you know, you can take out a few Jenga blocks and the tower's still standing all right. Then you take out one and it's reached a threshold and it loses all stability and you get ecosystem collapse. So I think part of it might be that. I think part of it might be that the fact that it is so international. And so a lot of the places that, for example, the poaching is being done, like, yeah, we can stop that, but unless the demand side is sorted, people are still going to do it illegally. Like, making something illegal doesn't stop it happening. But then the people at the governments at the demand side, they don't really have that much of an incentive to do anything about it because, you know, it's not hurting them. It's hurting the ecosystem somewhere else. So I think there is a kind of a little bit of that kind of selfish blindness there. And also, I think partly an awareness thing as well. Because you hear about maybe elephants, maybe rhinos, maybe gorillas, maybe tigers. But actually, you know, all sorts of wildlife crime is less obviously exciting and less well known. Like, you know, I think the weirdest episode I made for the podcast was about smuggling baby eels. Billions and billions and billions of baby eels. And it sounds weird, but like it's on a massive scale and it's a massive business. And you're gonna have to check it out. I don't want to give too much away.
It sounds really interesting. But yeah, so would you say we should be pressuring our governments to do something about it, or do our individual actions make more of a difference?
I would say that, yeah, I would say that pressuring government is absolutely key, because, and that can be part of your individual actions. But yeah, there's the international cooperation angle. We're not going to do that from our living rooms. To really address the causes and the mechanisms that enable this to happen and encourage it to happen, that's something that's got to be done by governments, and they're not going to care about it unless they think you care about it.
Thank you. I'll now hand over to Kit to ask some more questions.
Yeah, the podcast sounds very, very, very interesting. I mean, I'm really looking forward to listening to that. But other than the baby eels, are there any other favorite episodes of yours that you're proper proud of and find interesting?
I really liked the birds of prey in the UK episode. I think because it really brought it home and stopped it being this kind of like, oh, it's this exotic problem, and it really, you know, and it had a real class aspect to it. It was very much like, it was very stark in the way that it was, you know, rich exploiting poor, damaging environment. That chain was very, very clear. It was, you know, it's not like this big complicated supply chain that goes all over the world and stuff. Yeah, that was a fun one. I enjoyed the orchid episode more than I expected to. Because you don't think of plants as something that gets smuggled. But I had some really lovely conversations with some great people on that. And in the last episode, they let me finish it with a Wu-Tang Clan quote. So, I'm happy with that.
Smart. Sneaking that in when you can. But I also found the UK stuff about sort of localizing it sort of really did hit home, and sort of made me sort of think the problems that we sort of face in the UK with like agriculture, I guess, and monocultures or deforestation. Do they count as wild crimes, or do you think they will be in the future?
They don't count as wild crimes because they're not illegal. But we all know that there's sometimes a difference between what's illegal and what's moral, or what's good or beneficial or damaging. It's monocultures are very damaging. And there is some really promising research and going into kind of much more kind of holistic farming and grouping different crops together and planting trees in fields and stuff. And it means that it's a little bit more difficult to do the kind of like big intensive farming, but it means that you have to use a lot less artificial fertilizer, and it means that you support a lot more of a kind of robust ecosystem. You're not going to get one disease coming along and wiping everything out. And often, you can bring in, if you've got a healthy, robust ecosystem, you don't need to use so many pesticides because you've got, predators there that are going to be helping control stuff. But I think it's an attitude change thing, and it's hard because there's lots of money to be made. Although farming in the UK, the industry is having quite a bit of trouble with kind of remaining profitable as well. But I think that also ties into the international aspect, because we live in an international world. Crops and commodities and stuff traded all over the place. Often we will export some of the same stuff we import. So yeah, it's a toughie. But I think, kind of more holistic and more robust, ecologically robust agriculture is it's not crazy, and we're making moves towards it, but not fast enough.
Yes, thank you very much. I mean, I'm wondering what questions are coming through the chat. I know we're waiting for some from the audience, but if there's anyone else who wants to ask something, go ahead.
If you've got any questions, just put them in the Q&A section. I just wanted to go back to the exotic pet section, because it's quite interesting that so many people have exotic pets and you don't really think of them as like a big deal. They've become more normalized, and especially with like so many influences and people getting pets. I remember after like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or whatever, there became like a huge surge in like people wanting pet turtles or whatever. But do you think exotic pets should be phased out? Do you think people should just learn to take care of them? How do you tackle it?
Yeah, I remember we discussed this a little bit in one of the episodes, and I was pretty conflicted about it, because it's hard to have a kind of blanket judgment on that, because exotic just means it's not native to the country that you're in, and there are plenty of exotic pets that you can bred in captivity, or it's not, buying them is not contributing actively to depletion of wild populations, damage of ecosystems, but there is it's quite hard to guarantee and to actually reliably trace the origin of a lot of exotic pets, and B, there's a whole nother question of, should we be farming exotic pets in the first place? And that's I think much more up for debate. And but when it comes to owning exotic pets, if you can be absolutely certain that it came from a reputable breeder or something, I think you can own it without knowing that knowing that you're not actively contributing to damage of the ecosystem. That said, still contributing to a culture of owning exotic pets, which, you know, even if you're not owning a problematic exotic pet, you're expanding that kind of culture of owning exotic pets, which will lead some other people to probably obtain problematic or illegal exotic pets, even if they don't know that they're doing it. Because one of the things that we explore in the reptiles episode is that a lot of the paperwork chains for this are really patchy, often on purpose. That's one of the real problems actually with investigating and kind of prosecuting and even studying wildlife crime, and any kind of crime really, is because it's illegal. So you only know that it's happened when someone gets caught or when you see evidence of it happening. So yeah, it's just like everything with this whole topic. It's complicated.
Do you know about the parakeets in South London? And did they come from an outbreak of exotic pets?
So I actually live in Streatham. So the parakeets of Brockwell Park are my constant accompaniment. I really like them. I don't know exactly where they came from. There are various kind of stories and rumors about it. There's one that I'm not sure I believe, that they're descended from Jimi Hendrix's pet parrots that escaped his flat. But that's, I'd love that to be true, but I'm not sure. They must have, they almost definitely escaped, you know, a couple escaped from captivity and kind of exploded in population. But from where? I don't know. But, you know, they don't really have many natural predators in the UK, especially with such a short supply of birds of prey. So, you know, London, it's a bountiful city for people and birds. So they had a lot of population growth.
Would you say all these like exotic or wild animals are different in zoos where they're being kept and contained?
Zoos are complicated as well. Sorry to ruin everyone's fun with everything being complicated, but zoos, first of all, zoos are not all the same. There are some that are quite legitimately conservation focused, and they are public attractions, yes, but they, you know, they have, for example, captive breeding programs of endangered species, and, you know, they're quite careful with how they keep their animals. And there are others that are much more kind of Tiger King end of stuff, where it's very much kind of a visitor attraction first. Animals, yeah, if they die, whatever. So obviously the kind of blatantly exploitative and kind of obviously bad zoos, obviously bad. The arguably nice, conservation focused, treat their animals well zoos, it's still complicated because there are arguments for and against zoos. There are, you know, for example, they some of them do a lot of work to preserve endangered species, but then reintroduction into the wild isn't often super successful because they were normally endangered because we destroyed their habitat, so they got nowhere to go. And you're never going to be able to give an animal in a zoo the conditions that it would in the wild. You know, even if you give an elephant a football stadium to live in, these are animals that are used to walking across entire countries. So I don't want to say they're bad, but they're complicated, and there are real discussions to be had about that. Personally, I haven't been to a zoo in a long time. I love animals. Like when I was at Bristol uni, I used to go to the zoo and hang out with the pygmy hippos. Great, but now, and this is very much my personal opinion, this is not the opinion of the Natural History Museum, this is not the opinion of ecologists or anyone, this is just me. Zoos make me sad, because, you know, I see these animals and it's almost impossible to give them the space that they need and deserve. And we often underestimate how intelligent and emotional these animals can be, especially if they're not mammals, because mammals have nice expressive faces, but birds and reptiles and fish and stuff, we just assume that they're just little machines. So yeah, personally, not a zoo guy anymore, but zoos as concept, there's an argument to be had for them. There are also arguments against them.
So there is a question from Stella. How effective is prosecuting individual smugglers in breaking up chains of smuggling?
Not very. Unfortunately. So what? Oh, sorry. What were you going to say, Kit?
I was going to say maybe it's better to go for the transit, the people in transit, and block it on its
Yes. So if we're looking at source, transit, destination, destination is a great place to enforce, because if you can cut off the demand, then the rest of the supply chain, there's no reason for it to exist. But arresting people doesn't stop the demand. It can disrupt the flow, but sometimes that just drives up price. What you really need to do is kind of change attitudes, and that's difficult but important and doable. Then the supply end, again, a lot of these people are doing it out of necessity, and a lot of the reason that they're in that kind of financial necessity because of people like us in rich countries who for hundreds of years have made them poor. So is it right to really focus on targeting them? Obviously, we do need to protect at the source end, but in terms of kind of enforcement, that's a toughie. And the transit part, really, really difficult. It's really difficult because they, it's an illegal trade, so it's obviously hidden, and B, it can, some of this stuff can travel several, to all sorts of countries and continents on its way around the world. Sometimes you'll see stories of, them finding a shipment of, several tons of pangolin scales, or a warehouse full of eels, or something like that, and that's really great. But often the people don't actually get that much of a sentence because these crimes aren't taken particularly seriously, and the legal framework is quite light around. So, for example, there was someone who was smuggling dinosaur fossils, I think, and they got caught. But the only thing they got done for was mislabeling the fossils. They didn't get done for stealing them from the country of origin. They got done for just the wrong paperwork. But that said, they got Al Capone on tax evasion. So we've got to use whatever tools we can. But yeah, you're right. Hunting down individual people it's an important part of it, and I would say focus on the transit and the demand side to reduce the pressure on the supply side. But then you've really got to have that system change around it. Otherwise, you're just fiddling.
During that answer, you said something about something making prices go up. And I'm guessing if we put more laws into place and these become harder to get hold of, prices go up. Do you think that kind of gives people more incentive to get them because it's all about capitalism, getting money, or?
Yeah, in some respects, yes. It's there. Stuff does get more expensive when it's illegal. It's the same with things like drugs. If you look at cannabis in America, and the kind of the legalization around that, the way that that's become a market and stuff. Although, to be fair, if you make it legal, then it will still go up in price as well, because that's what capitalism does. Like, all prices go up. So it's a really hard one to thread, especially because a lot of these crimes, even the source countries, it's across a range, because animals don't respect borders. Borders are human things. So, for example, the ivory trade. Across the elephant's range in Africa, there is disagreement between governments as to whether it should be illegal or legal, and whether, there are some governments that will, find a whole shipment of ivory and publicly burn it. And that's to send a message that, zero tolerance on ivory trade. But you've just reduced the supply, which means that whoever's still got ivory, that's worth much more. So yeah, having it illegal and enforcing it and stuff like that is, they're crucial parts of the solution. But if we don't solve the root cause, then, like I said, it's all just tinkering around the edge.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Without any more questions in the Q&A, I might just finish with one, just to see whether there is a podcast episode on the abomination of pugs, or whether personal opinions drifting around.
I'm not a pug fan, but the law says they're okay, so they don't count as a crime, so they're not on the show. That's the line. So we are, we're hoping to get some funding for a second series, hopefully. No promises, but watch this space. And we're looking at what kind of stories we do want to include in that. And we have talked about kind of what the remit is, what counts as a wild crime. And what we really wanted to do is keep it as a crime podcast about wildlife crime. And so, deforestation, bad. But we've got to talk about illegal deforestation, or fracking, bad. But we need to talk about times that people have skirted regulations and there's been oil leaks or stuff like that. So much as I might think pugs are a crime, no offense to individual pugs or pug owners, but much as I might think pugs are a crime against nature, they're not going to be on the show.
Thank you very much. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed that. Of course I did. But I just want to say thank you. Thank you, Khalil.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
No problem. And of course, I'd like to say thank you to the organisers, Mr. Jones and the SSLP, everyone who got involved. So, hope you all enjoyed. And once again, thank you, Khalil. Bye-bye.
Oh, thank you. Goodbye.